As mentioned by Julian, the OSCE has been, at the heart of its work, has been a mediator from the very beginning. It's the heart of OSCE's engagement. And it is used throughout what we call our conflict cycle, which is in the early warning phase before a conflict is already on the ground, in the conflict prevention phase where there are indicators and there is something going on, the crisis management during the conflict itself, and in post-conflict rehabilitation. This mediation, dialogue facilitation can and should happen at all those phases, all the time. This is a tool that has been used, and as Duško was mentioning, from ancient time, and we could even recall the Romans and before, where this was a tool, but nowadays it is still the case, and that's why, and I will mention later on, mediation support structures have been created, and Asif and Roxana here are a representative of the mediation support unit. We have in the OSCE a mediation support team, and other organizations also have or are in the process of establishing such structures. Let me just go back. Julian mentioned that we're directly engaged in high-level mediation efforts in different established formats. Yes, and I will mention these during my presentation, but I want to go back into some history or some framework before doing so. First of all, of interest, the OSCE, before becoming the O of OSCE's organization, but it was a conference. It was established as a conference back in 1975. Beginning of the 70s, discussions started, stemming from the fact that between East and West, there was no real platform for communication. The Cuban Missile Crisis, for instance, showed that there was no direct contact between the United States and the USSR. There was no opportunities to be able to be in touch. And stemming from these events that brought the world to the brink of catastrophic events, the idea of having a platform for dialogue was developed and finally established in the Helsinki Final Act in 1975. And where East and West would gather in conferences. And this process has been going on until the 90s, when then big changes occurred, the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Eastern Bloc as well, and new priorities and new issues, and some were mentioned today as the former Yugoslavia entered into a period of conflict, and the conference adapted itself into an organization to address new needs. And in 1992, a Helsinki document mentioned the peaceful settlement of conflicts, whether these were emerging or were protracted. And this commitment was further strengthened in 2011 with a Ministerial Council decision, which is the Ministerial Council of the OSCE gathers every year, and is decision-making body that leads the organization in what it does and what it focuses upon. And the mean of peaceful settlement of conflict includes negotiation, mediation, conciliation, arbitration, and judicial settlement. And these are tools that are existing. Not that they're used very often, because some of these were never used, but they're there, available. So, with this normative framework, the OSCE has been able to successfully establish dialogue platforms. and provide different mediation formats to conflict parties, enabling them to engage with each other and maintain as well these important channels of communication. And with the establishment of the OSCE mediation support team in the OSCE, we have been able to provide systematic mediation support to these formats. It doesn't mean that we were not doing it before, but this has been institutionalized. Let me mention a few formats, and some of you are very familiar with some of them. For instance, the OSCE acts as a co-mediator in the 5+2 talks. This is the Transnistrian settlement process, and works with Ukraine and the Russian Federation. The OSCE chairs, co-chairs the meetings. We have the OSCE, the Russian Federation, Ukraine, the EU, and the United States as mediators and observers. The OSCE has special representatives, and since Serbia was, we were discussing it at the dinner, Serbia in 2015 was our chairman, presiding the organization, and Ambassador Bogojevic was the special representative in this process. Also, the OSCE functions together with the UN and the EU as co-chairs in the Geneva international discussions on the conflicts in Georgia. And this is something that we are, of course, very much in touch with our colleagues of the United Nations, and Asif, I suppose, may mention this as well, and or we can discuss it further in the questions and answers. Also, the OSCE convenes under the OSCE auspices of the Minsk Group, dealing with the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, and is co-chaired by the Russian Federation, the United States, and France. And finally, the OSCE also acts as a mediator in the Trilateral Contact Group dealing with the crisis in and around Ukraine. And the TCG is composed of Ukraine, the Russian Federation, and the OSCE through a special representative, again, of the OSCE chairmanship in office. So apart from these established formats, the OSCE has played a mediation role in various settings. And for example, Duško mentioned the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia in 2001, when there were tensions, serious tensions, and OSCE, with other actors, of course, played a role in de-escalating. Also, we could mention Kyrgyzstan in 2010, when serious also movements and within the countries destabilized and possibly could have gone further. The OSCE is able to draw a variety of instruments for mediation and dialogue facilitation efforts. And these include, of course, the presidency, the chairman in office, who is the foreign minister of the country, the OSCE participating states. We don't call them member states in the OSCE, but participating states. So the participating state who is presiding the organization for that year, the chairperson in office is the foreign minister. Along with the foreign minister or the chairperson in office, he appoints special representatives for various matters. And also the Secretary General and the Secretariat, the Conflict Prevention Center, in which the mediation support team works, for instance. We have also institutions, the High Commissioner on National Minorities, for instance, who has a mandate and engages in quiet diplomacy, working all around the OSCE area and engaging in a quiet and discreet manner. Also having a mandate of early warning and raising the attention of the participating states on matters involving national minorities. The OSCE Parliamentary Assembly also has a special representative on mediation. And also several special representatives for countries, and I mentioned, for instance, the Transnistrian settlement process, but also we have a special representative on Southern Caucasus, and also we should not forget that the OSCE has 16 field operations and operates with heads of missions who are ambassadors on the ground. And these ambassadors and these missions are in contact within the countries where they are deployed with the political levels as well as the population and communities. So these are tools that are used to really facilitate and engage into dialogue and at national and local levels. In addition, I would like to mention that the conference that I mentioned before, which is now an organization, meets on a weekly basis with the Permanent Council. The Permanent Council gathered the 57 ambassadors of all the 57 participating states into discussion. And the Permanent Council is a place alongside with another format which is called the Forum for Security and Cooperation. Those two bodies gather on a weekly basis and discuss matters of interest from the participating states. If one participating state has an issue, he can bring it to the agenda, to the chairmanship, and this will be brought forth to the 57 for discussion. And this happens on a weekly basis, but can happen also on special cases if there is a need, when there is a crisis. It can happen at any time, weekend or holidays. It can be called by the chairmanship. So the platform for dialogue exists and is providing a strong credibility for the organization to provide this platform of discussion. I would like to also mention several challenges in the organization. One of these is the consensus-based decision-making process of the OSCE. So OSCE works on consensus. It means that everyone has to agree. And having 57 participating states, or the chairmanship and the 56 others, is quite a challenge to reach decisions. Also, another matter, well, just let me say something about this decision-making process on consensus. We have decisions, and decisions happen. And when they happen, you have the backup of those 57, which is a very strong message that is being sent, that the organization has the full support of all and everyone. And we are talking about large participating states, but also very small ones. And the OSCE on consensus, a small participating states could block a decision. But when we have all behind, this gives a strong push and a very strong political message that we all agree. And this is very important. The OSCE lacks the economic and the political incentives and leverage that other actors have at their disposal to support mediation efforts. And at the same time, this can be also an advantage, as the OSCE can be seen as an honest broker. But you see, we don't have the stick, let's say. Of course, the carrot is always preventing conflict or solving is beneficial for everyone, but there is no way for the organization to pressure. But once again, being on the ground and having this, let's say, lack of possibility to pressure is also a show of trust that the organization is here and has no hidden agenda or hidden interests. Special representatives that I mentioned just before are appointed on a yearly basis with the chairmanship. And so this is also something that is difficult because special envoys and special representatives are coming to assist in a process, and their work in 1 year within a protracted conflict or a protracted process is quite a short time. And actually, I mentioned the Serbian chairmanship with the Swiss, who was before. The two chairmanships tied together to work and appointed special representatives for more than 1 year, the time for the 2 chairmanships and 2 years. So Ambassador Bogojevic was here for a longer period, which is something that we try to replicate at the moment. But this is something that is a challenge, but also an opportunity. I want to now talk about dealing with protracted conflict, but not only protracted conflicts, but protracted processes. Because we have, let's take, for example, the Transnistrian settlement process. There was some violence which lasted very shortly, a short period of time. And since then, we're talking about a process, because there is no conflict anymore. There are not people dying on a regular basis. And so we should not talk about a conflict, but a process that has been ongoing for many, many years. Those disputes affect, at the end of the day, everyone, and especially the vulnerable people. And it was mentioned yesterday in the discussion, how the local populations are the victims of it. And within the local populations, how the most vulnerable are the ones that are paying the highest price. We're talking about women with children especially. We're talking about elderly or those who are handicapped that cannot, when they're trapped in a conflict area, cannot move somewhere else because they don't have, for instance, the financial means, or they don't have any relatives anywhere else and they're stuck in the area. And we're talking about these people. So we should never forget the human dimension and the tragedies that go with the conflict. And so this is something that needs to remain present in the minds all the time of the practitioners and those organizations. And this is something that is very close to my heart, having been deployed to many areas. Just giving you an example of a man who came to me when I was on the Russian Federation. I was actually, Julian, just to correct what you said, I was on the Russian Federation side at the Ukrainian border when I was head of mission. This man came to me. He was from Georgia, and in 2008 there was a conflict in Georgia, and he moved his family and made a new life in Luhansk. And it took him a lot of efforts and considerable amount of resources. And I was at the border, and he came to me and said, I see that you are an expert. Look, this is what I have done in 2008. It took me most of my energy and resources, and now I am in Luhansk. I created my new paradise with my family, and there is this conflict. What do I do? Will it stop soon? And of course, for me, what can I answer? Will it stop soon? Process is ongoing. It was right at the time when the conflict was serious and people were massively moving through the border. And so he told me, I moved the family to Kiev. Now, do I have to do this again? And this was his question. And so really remembering those people suffering, and so those who are over and over in this context. I want to highlight a couple of points. The OSCE has supported these official processes for many years. Those that were talking about protracted. We're talking about the conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh with the Minsk group, for instance. We're talking about the Transnistrian settlement process. More recently, the Geneva International Discussion on Georgia. And more recently, 4 years ago now, the conflict in and around Ukraine. Some of those processes have been a long time established formats. And at time, we need to think how to rethink or change our ways of addressing these processes and what kind of new openings can be found to do so. A point that is also spoken in the mediation support structures, but also in more widely formats, is the meaningful participation of women, which could provide one such opening. Including women follows the premises that more inclusive processes will lead to comprehensive agreements. that deals, of course, with the root causes of the conflicts. And this will, in turn, provide more sustainability and of the agreements themselves, because women are embedded in society in a different way than men, and they can widen the range of topics discussed, whether at the negotiating table or in the community-led formats, developmental needs or economic opportunities, human rights, access to justice, etc. Therefore, there is a need to somehow reframe the narrative. Women's meaningful participation in peace processes is not another complicating factor, but a necessity in order to achieve sustainable peace. And in this context, in the OSCE, we're doing a thinking process. And we are thinking it's not about if to increase the inclusion of women, but how to do it in those protracted format. So this is something that our mediation support team, together with the gender section, is currently undertaking a research project in this regard. The multi-track diplomacy that was mentioned by my colleagues, we spoke about track 1, track 2, track 1.5. There is the track 3, which is really civil society at the grassroots level as well. Multi-track diplomacy is something that is challenging. We spoke yesterday on the panel about how difficult it is for the mediators to exchange meaningful information, but there is a way, and there are some significant improvements. Of course, everything cannot be shared. There are very much sensitivities at the beginning of a process, especially when things are starting. There's security matters that are really high. Some people, if they're seen in contact with the opposition, may have a security threat on their own lives, but there is a need to initiate. And here, Norway is an example of providing a discrete platform for this dialogue and this contacts. And this happened on track 1. And this is also something that we have to keep in mind, the limitations of what can be done and shared, but also how much efforts can we do to include civil society and not let them on the side while big decisions that will impact their lives will be taken without them. I don't know how far I should go further, but just the OSCE has been providing tools that I mentioned, a platform for discussion, and will continue to do so as it is part of its mandate and framework. And I will be delighted to continue the discussion through the questions and answers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul.